have 20 minutes, and I'll try to use the 20 minutes to talk about the topic I've been given today, talking about politics and the constitution. First of all, in our revolution that we are involved in, of course, we are fighting for constitutional democracy. We're trying to see that Uganda can be governed in accordance with the set tenets of constitutionalism. It is important for everybody seeing us to understand that there is a difference between having a constitution and having constitutionalism. The constitution is a document, and we have, in many cases, in some countries, dictatorial countries, undemocratic constitutions, or what you might call unconstitutional constitutions. But constitutionalism denotes or means the culture of abiding by constitutional tenets like separation of powers, an independent judiciary, separation of powers, having different arms of government operating independently. Of course, when we talk about judicial independence, or even if we talk about the independence of the parliament and other organs, we are not saying that they are completely independent of other organs. We are saying that these might be interdependent in some respects, but it is extremely important that they are independent. In Uganda's case, we all know that all these tenets have fallen, and you cannot talk about Uganda and talk about constitutionalism in the same sentence, because as we speak, we all know that activist Kakwenza has a court order ordering the regime, security forces, to release him. But up to now, they are detaining him unconstitutionally. So when we talk about constitutionalism, you might have a constitution in place. Whether the constitution is democratic or not democratic, what matters most is the implementation of what the constitution says. Uganda had one of the best constitutions, in my view, and this is subject to debate. After 1995, it was what you might call a good constitution, because that constitution talked about separation of powers. It had clauses on judicial independence. It had term limits, presidential term limits, and so many other things, checks and balances that were put in place to ensure that, you know, Uganda can see a peaceful transition and can prosper. When you look at the preamble of our country's constitution, it tells you what our country has gone through. And it is a shame that General Museveni can really choose to ignore such a powerful preamble of our constitution. If I may just look it up quickly, but I even have most of it off head, because it talks about we the people of Uganda, recalling our history, which has been characterized by political and constitutional instability. You see, the framers of our constitution made it at the, the backdrop of what was going on in our country in the past, the struggles which our people went through to try and establish constitutional rule, etc., etc. And so that's why it says that we, the people of Uganda, recalling our history, which has been characterized by political and constitutional instability, recognizing our struggles against the forces of tyranny, oppression, and exploitation, committed to building a better future by establishing a socio-economic and political order through a popular, durable, I want you to mark the word popular and durable, national constitution based on the principles of unity, peace, equality, democracy, freedom, social justice, and progress. Exercising our sovereign and inalienable right to determine the form of governance for our country and having fully participated in the constitution-making process, do hereby, in and through the Constituent Assembly, enact, adopt, and give ourselves and our posterity. Look at the word posterity. This constitution, the 22nd day of September, 1995. So that was what came out of a very long process that was a bit consultative for us who teach constitutional history. You see the struggles which our people had gone through just right from the preamble of that constitution. Unfortunately, our constitution has gone through severe, I wouldn't want to call them amendments, because it has been raped on a number of occasions, not following the processes. As you know, in 2005, term limits were removed from the constitution. And many people always look at our constitution and say, why didn't they entrench the provisions, for example, on term limits? Maybe the people who looked at the constitution might have been naive in one or the other. But if you look at the structure of the constitution, it was intended that a president must not be in power for more than 2 terms. That was the initial plan in the constitution before the term limits were removed. And all other provisions, for example, on appointment of judges, many people say, why is it that it is Museveni who appoints judges? Why is it that it is Museveni who appoints the Electoral Commission? The assumption was that the president would only be there for 2 terms, and therefore, one president can appoint a certain number of judges, and another president would then come in and appoint a number of judges, etc., etc. It's a shame that currently, all judicial officers in Uganda, right from the Supreme Court to the lowest court, have been appointed by the Museveni regime after 36 years. So that is why all the other things like judicial independence collapses, because if that provision, and in a minute I'll talk about something we call the basic structure doctrine, and I don't intend, and David just told me earlier on that this is not intended to be academic. It's supposed to really talk about, to just give a few concepts and why we need to fight for constitutional rule, and how the constitution that we have in its present form can be used actually as a tool to further our struggle against oppression, against tyranny, and such other things. But it's very important to understand this historical background, that the framers of our constitution made this a solemn document such that, first of all, there would be term limits. The age limit, of course, was put there. Those who know the history will tell you that it was Museveni's oppressive tactic to make sure that Milton Obote, who was the president of Uganda previously, could not come and contest for the presidency at any one point. So Museveni was trying to keep himself in power by making sure that a person beyond 75 years of age would not run. But at least one of the things that is agreed upon internationally is the concept of term limits. And if you see progressive constitutions, they ought to have a provision on term limits and such other things. Now, when you take away the term limits, you affect all other provisions within the constitution. And that is why it is very important for everybody to understand this, that our constitution was initially good. But in my view, once you take away term limits, the constitution, the power of the constitution really diminishes. And that is why General Museveni was happy to work with it until he found another blockade in form of the age limit. So what we've seen in Uganda is that there is no constitutionalism. We have a constitution, but there is no constitutionalism. In fact, General Museveni views the constitution as a mere book, a piece of paper. Every time he feels that it is not serving his interests, he kicks it out of the way. And I'm sure all of you on this call have seen the new attempt to rape our constitution once again. They are now talking about changing the system from a presidential system to a parliamentary system. You may ask them why they have not talked about it for all this time. In fact, they criticized it initially because at independence, we had a parliamentary system of some sorts. And a parliamentary system is where the party with the biggest number of seats forms government. Museveni and his people criticized that system, talked about having a popular elected president, a presidential election that brings up a president through, where people are able to elect a president through a free and fair election, which of course has not happened in our case in Uganda. But increasingly, what we see in Uganda, and this is what many people ask me this question also, when I was still lecturing constitutional law, some students would ask, after I would talk about how the constitution has been really disrespected, etc., and they ask, but why then do we have a constitution? Dictators love constitutions because they want to give a semblance of constitutional rule. You know, previously in Africa, you saw coups and coups and coups. They became unpopular. The African Union at some point passed a resolution to completely condemn coups, although most of these people who are doing that were beneficiaries of coups. But after that, they said, okay, let's have democratic rule. But dictators love these constitutions. Why? Because they give them a semblance of legitimacy. Like General Museveni, for example. Every time he's asked, when are you going to run again? He says, we are going to follow our constitution. But the constitution which he knows he can easily manipulate, which he knows that he does not value it at all. And that is why a person like me, I thought it was useless for me to sit or stand before students every day teaching constitutional law in a country like this, where the constitution means nothing. So I thought that it was wise to come and first fight for the restoration of constitutional rule, and then it will make sense for anybody to sit before or stand before students and talk about constitutionalism or even constitutional law at all. Now, I talked about something called the basic structure of a constitution. And if you look at the basic structure of a constitution, the 1995 constitution, one of the key things, one of the most critical things, as I said, was term limits. Because if you look at the preamble of the constitution, it talked about, General Museveni himself had talked about the fact that Africa's problem was leaders who overstay in power. And so making the constitution and everything in there, it was at the backdrop of rigged elections, of fighting, of wars, of instability, etc., etc. And so in terms of our constitution, the most important provision in there was term limits because of the question of transition. That has been the biggest problem. That has been the Achilles heel of our country, Uganda, and that is why we are struggling. That is why people died in November. That's why people died in 2009. That is why people have been dying, why people were killed in thousands in northern Uganda. That is why, of course, people were killed in Kasese, etc., etc., because we have not solved the question of governance, which mostly emanates from the question of transition. How do you transit from one government to another, or even from one leader to another? The picture, of course, looks grim, and I say I have only 7 minutes left for my presentation. What I want to say is that for those people who are religious, you know, you can look at the constitution in our struggles as a Bible, as a Quran, etc., etc., that the way you want to look at it. One of the key things that we can use in our context to fight is the constitution of Uganda as it is. Because whereas many provisions have been taken away, we still have chapter 4 of our constitution. That is why we have an organization in Uganda called Chapter 4, which has since been, blocked by the regime run by our comrade Nicholas Opio. You know that Chapter 4 Uganda, together with other civil society organizations, were closed down by the regime some months back. But what does Chapter 4 say? Chapter 4 talks about human rights, talks about civic liberties, etc., etc. And that is why our president, the Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi, has been saying that if we were born in a country which has no constitution, which has no provisions on free and fair elections, etc., etc., then our fight would probably not be justified. Maybe we would go and look for other means. But one of the reasons why we keep fighting is because we are saying, let what is in the constitution at least be implemented. Yes, some of the provisions, as I've said, have been taken away. But for example, activist Kakwenza, he is in jail, being held incommunicado. When you look at Article 23 of our constitution, Article 28 of the constitution, Article 29, and all these provisions within Chapter 4 of the constitution, they guarantee the freedom of access to a lawyer. Once you've been restrained, or if you've been arrested, you must have access to a lawyer. You must have access to your doctor's medical team, but also you must be produced before court within 48 hours. And this means nothing to the Museveni regime. They keep arresting people, holding them incommunicado. The lawyers of Kakwenza have been looking for him and he's nowhere to be seen. So this gives us reason to keep fighting. So at least some of these provisions which are still within our constitution are extremely important for us to demand that at least they're implemented, especially in terms of the respect for the rule of law, the respect for human rights, etc., etc. Most importantly, our struggle, our revolution is based on people power. People power is founded on Article 1 of our constitution, which says that all power belongs to the people, who shall determine, the people of Uganda have a right to determine how they ought to be governed. And I will quickly go to that provision and read it verbatim. If you look at Article 1 of our country's constitution, I want to read Sub-Article 1 and 4. Clause 1 or Sub-Article 1 says that all power belongs to the people, who shall exercise their sovereignty in accordance with this constitution. In other words, in Uganda, it is not anybody, it is not General Museveni, it is not NRM which is sovereign. I saw Museveni in Kayunga saying that he has the last answer. No, the constitution says that all power belongs to the people, who shall exercise their sovereignty in accordance with the constitution. Now, clause 4 says that the people shall express their will and consent on who shall govern them and how they should be governed through regular, free and fair elections of their representatives or through referenda. Now, clause 2, if I could quickly go to it, it says that all authority in the state emanates from the people of Uganda, and the people shall be governed through their will and consent. That is extremely important, comrades, that the people of Uganda should have a right to determine how they should be governed. We have thousands of our people abducted by security organs, where you have the presidential candidates not allowed to be on media stations, etc., etc. That's not a free and fair election. I'll quickly go to Article 3 of our Constitution also, which gives us a solution to some of our problems that we have in our country. Article 3 of our Constitution talks about the power of the citizens to defend this Constitution. And it says that it is prohibited for any person or group of persons to take or retain control of the government of Uganda, except in accordance with the provisions of this Constitution. Question: is General Museveni in power in accordance with the provisions of our Constitution? No. Now it says in clause 2 that any person who singly or in concert with others by any violent or unlawful means suspends, overthrows, abrogates or amends this Constitution or any part of it or attempts to do so commits the offense of treason and shall be punished according to law. What General Museveni did in 2017 when they went to Parliament, arrested members of Parliament, did whatever they did, in my view, they did exactly what is prohibited by this provision. Now, it says that, listen to this clause 4, very important. All citizens of Uganda shall have the right and the duty at all times. It is not only a right, it is a duty to defend this Constitution, and in particular to resist any person or group of persons seeking to overthrow the established constitutional order, and to do all in their power to restore the Constitution after it has been suspended, overthrown, abrogated, or amended contrary to its provisions. So, friends, ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution of Uganda, even when it has been tampered with a number of times, even when it has gone through all these challenges that it has gone through, it still gives the citizens of Uganda the right and duty at all times to defend it and to ensure that the constitutional rule is restored in our country. I thank you so much for listening to me.